The candles were melting into the chocolate frosting as I sat alone in our dimly lit apartment, surrounded by birthday streamers and deflating balloons. My phone screen flashed with unanswered messages, each one more desperate than the last. The clock struck midnight, and I finally allowed myself to cry. James wasn't coming. He had forgotten my birthday. Again. But this time was different. This time I wasn't the same naive Catherine who died 2 years ago, or rather, 5 years in the future. The universe had given me a second chance, a rebirth with all my memories intact, while he continued on, blissfully unaware that history was repeating itself. I still remember the accident, the screeching tyres, the blinding headlights, James's panicked voice screaming my name. Then, darkness. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in our old apartment, 7 years in the past, with my entire life ahead of me. And James, sweet, ambitious, unfaithful James, had no idea. He promised, I whispered, running my finger through the buttercream frosting I'd spent hours perfecting. He promised he wouldn't forget this time. My phone buzzed. A text message. "Sorry, babe. Work emergency. Don't wait up." The exact same message he'd sent in my previous life. Word for word. Period for period. I laughed then. A hollow sound that echoed against the walls of our empty apartment. 7 years ago, or rather in this timeline tonight, I had sobbed into my pillow, made excuses for him, and eventually fallen asleep clutching his old college sweatshirt. Not this time. This time I knew where he really was. I wiped my tears, pulled off the silly birthday crown I'd been wearing, and grabbed my car keys. The cake sat abandoned on the kitchen counter as I slammed the door behind me. I'd been planning for this moment for 2 years now. Ever since I'd returned, I'd made different choices, invested in different stocks, taken different opportunities. While James pursued his career at the same advertising firm, I quietly built my fortune from the shadows. Companies that would boom, technologies that would revolutionize the market, I knew it all. And I used that knowledge. The rain pattered against my windshield as I pulled into the parking lot of La Bella, the upscale Italian restaurant across town. I didn't need to check if his car was there. I knew it would be. From my purse, I pulled out a compact mirror and checked my reflection. In my previous life, I'd been mousy, insecure, always seeking his approval. My hair had been a plain brown, my wardrobe conservative and forgettable. Now, auburn waves cascaded down my shoulders, and my black dress hugged curves I'd worked hard to sculpt. I barely recognised myself, which was exactly the point. I stepped into the restaurant, the hostess greeting me with a practiced smile. "Table for one, please," I said, my voice steady despite the hurricane raging inside me. "Somewhere with a view of the main dining area, if possible." She nodded, leading me to a small table near the bar. Perfect. From here, I could see the entire restaurant, including the intimate corner booth where James sat across from a woman I recognised all too well. Meredith, his future fiancée, the woman he'd leave me for in 8 months' time. They hadn't noticed me yet. James was leaning forward, his hand resting on hers, that familiar sparkle in his eyes, the sparkle I thought had been reserved for me. "Would you like to start with a drink?" the waiter asked, pulling me from my thoughts. "Champagne," I replied. "Your finest bottle. I'm celebrating tonight." He raised an eyebrow but didn't question me further. As I watched James and Meredith laugh over their appetizers, I didn't feel the crushing pain I'd expected. Instead, a cold clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about a forgotten birthday or a cheating boyfriend. This was about reclaiming my power, my life, my story. I sipped my champagne slowly, savouring its bitter effervescence. Tonight was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of Hartman and Pierce, the advertising firm where James had worked for the past 5 years. In my previous life, I had visited here often, bringing him lunch or surprising him with coffee. The receptionist had known me by name. "I have an appointment with Mr. Hartman," I told the new receptionist, who clearly didn't recognise me. "Catherine Reynolds." She tapped at her keyboard. "Yes, Miss Reynolds, he is expecting you." The elevator ride to the top floor gave me time to steel myself. I'd practiced this moment countless times in my head, rehearsed every word, anticipated every reaction. When the doors opened, Richard Hartman himself was waiting for me. "Miss Reynolds?" he greeted, extending his hand. "I've heard remarkable things about your portfolio. Please, come in." I followed him into his spacious corner office, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Through the glass walls, I could see James in the creative department, hunched over his computer, oblivious to my presence. "I was intrigued by your proposal," Richard said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "A complete overhaul of our digital strategy is ambitious, but your numbers are compelling." I smiled, placing my portfolio on his desk. "The future of advertising isn't in print or television, Mr. Hartman. It's in targeted digital campaigns, social media integration, and immersive experiences. Your company is falling behind." Richard's expression tightened. He wasn't used to such directness, especially from someone he'd just met. But I knew his company's financials better than he did. In my previous life, I'd watched Hartman and Pierce struggle and eventually get acquired by a larger firm, a firm I now owned a significant stake in. "I'm not just offering consultation," I continued, opening my portfolio to reveal the detailed strategy I'd prepared. "I'm offering partnership. My firm would handle your digital transformation, and in return, we'd share in the increased revenue." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying me with newfound respect. "And what firm is that exactly? I've never heard of Reynolds Media." "We're new," I admitted, "but growing rapidly. We've already secured contracts with Thomson Global and Levine Entertainment." His eyes widened. Thomson Global was Hartman and Pierce's biggest competitor, and they'd recently launched a digital campaign that had the entire industry talking. A campaign I'd designed. "I see," he said slowly. "And why approach us, if you're already working with Thomson?" I allowed myself a small smile. "Let's just say I have a personal interest in seeing this company succeed." Our meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. By the end, Richard was convinced. We signed the preliminary agreement, shaking hands as partners. As I gathered my materials, he offered to give me a tour of the office. "Actually," I said, "I'd like to meet your creative team. They'll be instrumental in implementing these changes." Richard nodded, leading me through the office toward the creative department. James was still at his desk, now surrounded by colleagues as they reviewed storyboards for an upcoming pitch. "Everyone," Richard announced, "I'd like you to meet Catherine Reynolds of Reynolds Media. They'll be partnering with us on a new digital initiative." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me, including James's. I watched as confusion, then shock, then recognition flashed across his face. "Catherine," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I extended my hand to him as if meeting for the first time. "James, is it? I look forward to working together." The colour drained from his face as he shook my hand mechanically. His palm was sweaty, his grip weak. I held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, enjoying the panic blooming in his eyes. "Miss Reynolds will be overseeing the digital transformation of all our major accounts," Richard continued, oblivious to the tension. "Including the Skyline Hotels pitch you're working on, James." Skyline Hotels. The account that would make James's career in my previous life. The account that would lead to his promotion to late nights at the office that weren't really at the office, to Meredith. "Actually," I interjected smoothly, "I've been reviewing the Skyline portfolio and I think it needs a fresh perspective. Perhaps another team member could take the lead?" James's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Miss Reynolds, I've been developing this pitch for months." I tilted my head, feigning consideration. Quality over time invested, wouldn't you agree? Richard, what are your thoughts? Richard hesitated, glancing between us. James is one of our best. But if you feel strongly about this... I do, I said firmly. Later, as I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from James. What the hell are you doing? I smiled, picturing his frustrated face, the sense of control slipping through his fingers. In my previous life, I'd supported his career unconditionally, put his ambitions before my own, celebrated his successes while quietly burying my dreams. Not this time. Just business, James, nothing personal. But it was personal, very personal, and I was just getting started. That night, as I sat in my new penthouse overlooking the city, I scrolled through my calendar to a date marked in red, August 17th. In my previous life, this was the day James had proposed to Meredith at Ciel, the exclusive rooftop restaurant with its breathtaking city views. I'd learned about it later, through mutual friends who didn't know we were still technically together when it happened. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Miss Catherine, my assistant answered promptly. Schedule a meeting with the real estate division, I instructed. I've found our next acquisition. Of course. May I ask which property? I walked to the window, staring out at the twinkling city lights, a smile playing on my lips. Le Ciel restaurant, I said, and make it happen quickly. We have a deadline. Le Ciel isn't for sale, my real estate director informed me the next morning, sliding a folder across my desk. The owner, Mr. Vega, has rejected acquisition offers from 3 major restaurant groups in the past year alone. I flipped through the documents, studying the property details and financial statements. Le Ciel was more profitable than I'd anticipated, which explained Vega's reluctance to sell. Everyone has a price, David, I replied, closing the folder. We just need to find his... With all due respect, Miss Reynolds, we've researched Mr. Vega extensively. He's 68 years old, financially secure, and considers Le Ciel his legacy. It's not about money for him. I leaned back in my chair, tapping my pen against the mahogany desk. Legacy. That was something I understood all too well. Then, we don't approach him about money, I said slowly, an idea forming. We approach him about legacy. 2 days later, I sat across from Antonio Vega in his private office, above Le Ciel's main dining room. The restaurant wouldn't open for another 3 hours, but the staff was already preparing for the evening service, their movements precise and practiced. Miss Reynolds, Antonio said, his accent still thick despite decades in the States. I appreciate you coming in person, but as I told your people, Le Ciel is not for sale. I nodded, accepting the espresso his assistant offered. I understand completely, Mr. Vega, and, truthfully, that's not why I'm here. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. I'm not interested in buying Le Ciel to change it, I explained. I'm interested in preserving it. For the next hour, I laid out my vision. Not an acquisition, but a partnership. The Ciel would remain under his creative direction, but with my company's resources behind it. Expansion to select cities, a culinary school bearing his name, a cookbook featuring his family recipes. Your legacy wouldn't end with this restaurant, I told him. It would be the beginning. By the time I left, we had the framework of an agreement. Not ownership, not yet, but a path forward. A partnership that would gradually transition into acquisition, with Antonio maintaining creative control for as long as he wished. It wasn't the quick takeover I'd initially planned, but watching Antonio's eyes light up as he described his dream of a culinary school, I realised something. My revenge against James didn't need to involve destroying others. It could be about creation too. The next few months were a whirlwind. By day, I oversaw the transformation of Hartman and Pierce's digital strategy, deliberately keeping James at arm's length professionally. By night, I worked with Antonio to elevate Le Ciel's profile, introducing a new prix fixe menu that had food critics raving, and reservation wait times extending to months. James tried to contact me several times. Texts, calls, even showing up at my office once. But I maintained a polite distance. Our interactions were strictly professional and always with others present. It drove him crazy, I could tell. The more I pulled away, the more he pushed forward. "You've changed," he said one evening, cornering me in the office kitchen. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, but I'd stayed to review the quarterly numbers. I measured a perfect scoop of coffee into the machine, not bothering to look at him. People do that. Not like this. He moved closer, his familiar cologne bringing unwanted memories. The hair, the clothes, the sudden business empire. What happened to you, Kat? The old nickname sent a jolt through me. But I kept my expression neutral. Life happened, James. We grew apart. It happens every day. He shook his head, frustration evident in every line of his body. We were happy. We had plans. I finally turned to face him, leaning against the counter. Did we? Or did you have plans, and I was just expected to fit into them? That's not fair. Isn't it? I picked up my coffee mug, moving toward the door. You should get home. Meredith will be waiting. His sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit a nerve. How do you... It's a small industry, I cut him off. People talk. Before he could respond, I walked away, the sound of my heels echoing in the empty hallway. It took every ounce of self-control not to look back, not to see the confusion on his face. Because the truth was, despite everything, a tiny part of me still cared. Still wondered if things could have been different. If I could have saved us in this new timeline. But then I remembered sitting alone on my birthday, candles melting into a cake no one would eat. I remembered the accident that ended my first life, coming home early to surprise him, only to find our apartment empty, driving through a storm to confront him at Ciel, where a mutual friend had spotted him with Meredith, the truck appearing out of nowhere on the rain-slicked road. No, some things couldn't be fixed, some betrayals cut too deep. July turned to August, and the date circled in red on my calendar approached. August 17th, the day James had proposed to Meredith in my previous life. The day that was supposed to be our 5th anniversary. The transition paperwork is ready, my lawyer informed me. Mr. Vega has agreed to the accelerated timeline. I signed the documents without hesitation. As of midnight on August 16th, Ciel would be mine, just in time. That evening, I met Antonio on the rooftop garden of Ciel, where herbs and vegetables for the restaurant's signature dishes grew in meticulously maintained planters. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, watching me examine a sprig of rosemary. "Selling now? The culinary school plans are just getting started." I smiled, reassuring him. "The plans continue exactly as we discussed. Your vision, my resources. Nothing changes except the paperwork." He studied me for a moment, his weathered face thoughtful. "This is personal for you, isn't it? This restaurant." I hesitated, then nodded. There was no point lying to him. Antonio had become something of a mentor over the past months, teaching me about food, about passion, about turning pain into creation. "Someone I once cared about is planning a special event here tomorrow night," I admitted. "I need to be here for it." Antonio didn't press for details, and I was grateful. Instead, he walked me through the garden, pointing out the heirloom tomatoes that would feature in tomorrow's special, the lavender that would infuse the creme brulee. "Life is too short for bad food and bad company," he said as we headed back inside. "Remember that, Catherine." I squeezed his hand gently. "I'm learning." Back home, I opened my laptop to check the reservation list for the following evening. My new position as owner came with certain privileges, including access to the booking system. Sure enough, there it was. J. Mitchell, Table 19, 8 p.m, special occasion, proposal. My stomach twisted into a knot. Some part of me had hoped that by changing the variables, by entering James's life differently this time around, the outcome would change too. But history was stubbornly repeating itself. I picked up my phone, dialing my assistant. "Eliza, I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow evening and contact the events team at Ciel. I want to make some changes to the setup for tomorrow night." The next evening, I arrived at Ciel 2 hours before James's reservation. The staff had been briefed about the new ownership, and while there were curious glances, they remained professionally focused on preparing for the night ahead. "Everything is arranged as you requested, Miss Reynolds," the maitre d' informed me. "Table 19 has been relocated to the East Terrace, with the string quartet positioned nearby. The chef has prepared the special menu and the champagne is chilling." I nodded, satisfied. "And the private dining room." "Ready for you with a clear view of the terrace." Perfect. I wouldn't be sitting at James's table. That would be too obvious, too confrontational. Instead, I'd watch from a distance as his carefully planned evening unravelled. As the first guests began to arrive, I retreated to the private dining room. Through its angled windows, I had an unobstructed view of table 19, now positioned directly under a canopy of twinkling lights. It looked magical, romantic, perfect for a proposal. Exactly as it had been in my previous life when I'd seen the photos on social media. Photos posted the same night I'd died. At precisely 8:05 p.m, James arrived with Meredith on his arm. She looked beautiful in a midnight blue dress, her blonde hair swept up in an elegant twist. James wore the same suit he'd worn the night he'd forgotten my birthday, a detail that didn't escape my notice. They were seated at table 19, champagne was poured, and the first course arrived. Everything proceeded exactly as planned. James's plan, not mine, not yet. I watched as they laughed over appetizers, as he reached across the table to hold her hand, as he checked his pocket for what I knew was the emerald-cut diamond ring he'd spent 3 months' salary on. The ring that should have been mine, in a different lifetime. At 9:30 p.m, as dessert was being served, James signalled the maitre d'. It was time. The string quartet shifted from their ambient selections to a more recognisable melody. "Can't Help Falling in Love," Meredith's favourite song, according to the notes he'd left with his reservation. I stood, smoothing down my dress. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for months. As James began to rise from his seat, ready to drop to one knee, I pressed the intercom button. "Now," I instructed. The music abruptly stopped. The ambient lighting shifted, focusing a soft spotlight on the entrance to the terrace. Conversation died down as guests turned to see what was happening. I stepped through the doorway, into the spotlight. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent space. "Welcome to the grand reopening of Ciel under new management." James froze halfway out of his chair, the ring box clutched in his hand. His eyes found mine across the terrace, widening in shock and confusion. "Please, enjoy complimentary champagne as we celebrate this new chapter," I continued, gesturing to the servers, who began circulating with trays of glasses. Applause broke out among the guests, who were delighted by the unexpected generosity. Only one table remained silent, table 19, where James had sunk back into his seat, the proposal moment thoroughly disrupted. I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations from patrons who had no idea of the real drama unfolding. Finally, I approached table 19, champagne flute in hand. "James," I greeted him with practiced ease. "What a lovely surprise to see you here." Meredith looked between us, confusion evident on her face. "You two know each other?" James cleared his throat, struggling to regain his composure. "Catherine is an old friend, and apparently the new owner of Ciel." I smiled, raising my glass slightly. "As of yesterday. Perfect timing, wouldn't you say?" His eyes narrowed slightly as understanding dawned. This wasn't coincidence. This was calculated. "Congratulations," he managed, his voice strained. "If you'll excuse us, we were just in the middle of—" "A proposal," I interrupted, glancing pointedly at the ring box, now hastily shoved back into his pocket. "How romantic. Ciel has always been the perfect place for special occasions." Meredith's face lit up, her gaze dropping to James's pocket. "A proposal? James, is that true?" The moment was spiraling out of his control. I could see panic rising in his eyes, the same panic I'd felt watching the headlights approach on that rainy night in my previous life. "Perhaps I should leave you to it," I said, stepping back. "But first, a toast. To new beginnings, second chances, and—" I paused, looking directly at James. "Never forgetting what matters most." As I walked away, I heard Meredith's excited whispers, pressing James to continue with the proposal. But the moment was ruined. The spontaneity, the romance, the perfection he'd planned, all of it tainted by my presence, by the knowledge that I'd orchestrated this entire scenario. I returned to the private dining room, watching as James fumbled through a half-hearted proposal, the magic of the moment irretrievably lost. Meredith said, "Yes, of course." She slipped the ring onto her finger with tears in her eyes, oblivious to the tension radiating from her new fiancé. When they finally left an hour later, James cast one last look toward the private dining room. He couldn't see me through the tinted glass, but he knew I was watching. Knew I had won this round. My phone buzzed with a text message. "This isn't over," I smiled, typing my response. "No, it's just beginning. Happy anniversary, James." The morning after the proposal, I stood in Antonio's former office, my office now, staring out at the city skyline. A stack of congratulatory messages from industry colleagues sat unopened on the desk. News of my acquisition of Ciel had spread quickly through the business community, solidifying my reputation as a rising force. But it wasn't professional admiration I was thinking about as I watched the sun rise over the city. It was the look on James's face last night. The mixture of shock, anger, and something else, something that looked almost like regret. My phone rang, displaying Eliza's name. "Miss Reynolds, Mr. Mitchell is in the lobby, demanding to see you. Security is asking what to do." I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting this confrontation since his text last night. "Send him up," I instructed, "and hold all my calls for the next hour." 5 minutes later, James stormed into the office without knocking. His normally perfect appearance was dishevelled, shirt wrinkled, hair uncombed, eyes bloodshot from what I suspected was a sleepless night. "What the hell was that last night?" he demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Good morning to you too, James. Please, have a seat." "I don't want to sit. I want an explanation." I shrugged, pouring myself a cup of coffee from the carafe on the credenza. "About—" "Don't play dumb, Catherine. You know exactly what you did. You sabotaged my proposal deliberately." I took a slow sip of coffee, savouring the moment. "Did I? You still proposed. She still said yes. Congratulations, by the way." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration emanating from him in waves. "Why Ciel? Why that night? Of all the restaurants in the city, of all the business ventures you could pursue, why that one?" I set my cup down carefully, finally meeting his gaze. "Do you remember what day it was yesterday, James?" He frowned, thrown by the apparent non sequitur. "Thursday?" "August 17th, I clarified. "Does that date mean anything to you?" His expression remained blank, and something inside me hardened. Even now, he didn't remember. "It was our anniversary," I said quietly. 5 years since our first date. It was also the 1-month mark after my birthday. The birthday you forgot again while you were busy planning your future with Meredith. Understanding dawned in his eyes, quickly followed by defensive anger. This is about that, about a forgotten birthday. Jesus, Catherine, I apologised for that. Things at work were crazy, and it's not about a birthday, I cut him off. It's about patterns, about choices, about the fact that in my previous life, I stopped myself, realising how insane that would sound to him. In our previous relationship, I amended, you consistently chose everything and everyone else over me. And then you act surprised when I move on. He stared at me, bewilderment replacing anger. Previous life? What are you talking about? I waved a dismissive hand. Figure of speech. No, it wasn't, he insisted, stepping closer. You've been acting strange ever since you showed up at Hartman and Pierce. You know things you shouldn't know. You predicted the Thompson campaign before it even launched. You knew about Meredith before I ever mentioned her to anyone. I hadn't realised he'd been paying such close attention. Hadn't considered that my foreknowledge might raise suspicions. You're being paranoid, I said, trying to redirect the conversation. Business rivalries make people see patterns where none exist. But James wasn't deterred. When we were together, he said slowly, you used to have these nightmares. You'd wake up screaming about an accident, about headlights and rain. I thought they were just bad dreams. But they weren't, were they? What happened to you, Catherine? The coffee cup trembled slightly in my hand. I set it down before he could notice. You need to leave, I said, reaching for the intercom. I have meetings. He caught my wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop me. Tell me the truth. Please. Something in his voice, a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years, made me hesitate. In my previous life, I'd never told him about the dreams, the premonitions that had plagued me in the weeks before the accident. I'd been afraid he'd think I was crazy. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe this whole second chance was just an elaborate delusion my dying brain had created in those final moments before the truck hit. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, I said finally. Try me. I studied his face, searching for any hint of the manipulative charm he'd used so effectively in our relationship. But all I saw was genuine concern and fear. I died, I said simply, the words feeling strange on my tongue. I'd never said them aloud before. 2 years from now, or 5 years ago, depending on how you look at it, I died in a car accident. And then I woke up here, 7 years in the past with a chance to do everything differently. I expected him to laugh, to back away slowly, to call for security. Instead, he sank into the chair I'd offered earlier, his face pale. The nightmares, he whispered. You were seeing your own death. I nodded, surprised by his acceptance. I was driving to Ciel that night. I'd found out you were there with Meredith on what was supposed to be our anniversary. It was raining, a truck ran a red light. I didn't have time to stop. James covered his face with his hands, his shoulders hunched. That's why you bought Ciel. That's why you targeted my account at Hartman and Pierce. That's why you showed up last night. Partly, I admitted, but it's more complicated than simple revenge. I got a second chance, James. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? I couldn't waste it trying to fix us because I know how that story ends. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. How does it end? With me alone in an apartment on my birthday, waiting for someone who isn't coming. With me driving through the rain to confront the man I love about the woman he's with headlights and screaming brakes and then nothing. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Outside, the city continued its morning bustle, oblivious to the impossible conversation happening in this office. I never meant to hurt you, James said finally, in either timeline. I laughed, a hollow sound. That's the tragedy of it. You never meant to, but you did. Again and again. And now you're hurting me back. Now I am living my life, I corrected him, a better life than the one that got cut short. If that hurts you, then maybe you should examine why. He stood abruptly, pacing the length of the office. So, what happens now? You've disrupted my proposal, you've taken over my biggest account, you've inserted yourself back into my life in the most dramatic way possible. What's the end game here, Catherine? It was a fair question. One I hadn't fully answered for myself. When I'd first realised I'd been given a second chance, revenge had been my driving force. Watching James suffer as I had suffered had seemed like justice. But now, standing in this office that represented everything I'd built for myself in this new timeline, I wasn't so sure. There is no end game, I told him honestly. Not anymore. Last night at Ciel, that was the culmination of 2 years of planning. But when I saw your face, when I saw how easily I could destroy your moment, it didn't feel like I thought it would. And how did you think it would feel? Satisfying, I admitted. Triumphant, like justice. And instead, I turned away, looking out at the city again. Empty, like I was still letting you define my life, just in a different way. James was quiet for a moment, processing this. So, where does that leave us? There is no us, James, I said gently. There can't be. Not in this timeline, not in any timeline. We're too broken, too tangled in what was and what could have been. You're engaged to Meredith, and I have a life that doesn't revolve around you anymore. He flinched at the finality in my voice. And Meredith? Were you planning to tell her about us? I shook my head. That's your responsibility, not mine. Whatever you choose to tell her, or not tell her, is your burden to carry. Always the moral high ground, he muttered, but there was no real bite to his words. Just resignation. I didn't respond, and after a moment he moved toward the door. With his hand on the knob, he paused, looking back at me. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I am sorry about your birthday. Both times. A lump formed in my throat. I know. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. I stood motionless, staring at the space he'd occupied, feeling something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, I wasn't there yet, might never be there, but something like release. I picked up my phone, dialing Eliza, cancel my meetings for the day, and contact Antonio. Tell him I'd like to move forward with the culinary school plans immediately. It was time to focus on creation rather than destruction, on building a future rather than avenging the past. 3 months later, I stood on the rooftop garden of Ciel, watching as Antonio guided a group of aspiring chefs through the process of harvesting herbs for the evening service. The Vega Culinary Institute had opened its doors last week with a waiting list that stretched into the next year. Miss Reynolds, my assistant called from the doorway, your 4 o'clock is here. I nodded, taking one last look at the garden, at the legacy Antonio and I were building together, before heading back inside. James and Meredith's wedding announcement had appeared in the society pages last weekend. A spring ceremony, according to the brief article. I'd felt a twinge of something when I saw it. Not jealousy, not exactly, but a ghost of what might have been in another life. I'd sent a congratulatory arrangement to his office, not out of spite or to remind him of my presence, but as a genuine gesture of moving on. The card had been simple. To new beginnings, K. He hadn't responded, and I hadn't expected him to. Some chapters needed to stay closed. As I walked through the restaurant, now bustling with the early dinner service, I noticed a couple being seated at table 19. Young, in love, the man nervously patting his pocket every few minutes, clearly planning a proposal. I caught the eye of the maitre d' nodding slightly. He understood immediately, instructing the waiter to bring a complimentary bottle of champagne to the table. Some wounds would always remain, some memories would never fade completely. But in this new life, I could choose how they shaped me. I could choose to be someone who celebrated love rather than sabotaged it, who built rather than destroyed. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder: birthday dinner with Eliza and team, 7 p.m. I smiled, tucking the phone away. This year, I wouldn't be spending my birthday alone. This year, I'd be surrounded by people who valued me, who remembered what mattered. This year and every year after, I'd celebrate the life I'd built for myself, the life I'd been given a second chance to live. As I stepped into my office for the 4 o'clock meeting, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Auburn hair, confident posture, eyes that had seen another lifetime. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still wondered about the physics or metaphysics of it all. How had I come back? Why had I been given this chance? But those questions mattered less with each passing day. What mattered was what I did with the time I'd been given, how I lived this second life. The intercom buzzed. "Miss Reynolds, they're ready for you in the conference room." "Thank you, Eliza," I replied. "I'll be right there." I took one last look at my reflection, straightening my shoulders. The past was written, both versions of it. But the future, this future, was still mine to create. And this time around, I wasn't waiting for anyone to remember my birthday. This time, I was making every day count. When my actual birthday arrived a few weeks later, I was surprised to find a small package waiting on my desk. No card, no note, just a simple box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a vintage compass, its face slightly worn, its needle still pointing true north. I didn't need a card to know who it was from. James had given me a similar compass on our second date, after I'd confessed my fear of getting lost. "So you'll always find your way back," he'd said then. But this wasn't that compass. That one had been destroyed in the accident. This was a new one, different but similar. A recognition of parallel paths, divergent journeys. I placed it on my bookshelf, not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but as a symbol of what I'd found. My way forward, my true north, my second chance. Outside my window, the city glittered in the morning sun. Somewhere out there, James was starting his day with Meredith. Somewhere, Antonio was teaching his first class at the Culinary Institute. Somewhere, the universe continued its mysterious workings, weaving together lives and deaths and rebirths in patterns beyond comprehension. And here I was, alive again, living a life I'd never imagined possible. A life built on the ashes of revenge, but blossoming into something far more powerful. Redemption. I picked up my phone, scrolling to a number I hadn't called in months. After a moment's hesitation, I typed a simple message. "Thank you for the compass. I've found my way." Then, I slipped the phone into my purse, grabbed my coat, and headed out to face another day in this second, precious life. No longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had claimed for myself. After all, that was the true revenge. Living well. The candles on my birthday cake this year wouldn't be melting into chocolate frosting as I sat alone in a dimly lit apartment. They would be surrounded by friends, by accomplishments, by a future stretching bright before me. And when I blew them out, I wouldn't be wishing for someone to remember me. I would be celebrating the woman who remembered herself,